man hiding under your bed, teeth ground sharp, and eyes glowing red.
So this is a story for when I was 10 years old. We had just moved to this old house because my dad got a new job in a different state. The house, it looked really old. Mum said it had character, but I thought it was a little scary. At first, things were okay. We unpacked our stuff and I got my own room. But sometimes, I heard strange noises at night. Just little creaks and taps. Mum always said it was just an old house settling, but it still made me nervous. A few weeks later, the noises got louder. It sounded like footsteps. But there was no one there. I'd peek out of my room, but nobody was around. I told Mum and Dad, but they thought it was just my imagination. Then, one night, my toys started moving on their own. My stuffed animals shifted places, and my toy car rolled across the room. I was so scared I ran to my parents' room and told them what happened. Dad checked, but he couldn't find anything unusual and was kind of annoyed that I woke him up. After that, things got progressively worse. The lights flickered, even when there was no storm. The TV turned on by itself. The volume would fluctuate, and it would change channels. Mum and Dad started getting a bit worried. They called an electrician, but he couldn't find any problems. Things continued to get worse. Shadows moved on walls, and whispers filled the air. I saw a figure in my room one time, but it disappeared when I blinked. I was terrified, and began sleeping with the lights on. One night, I awoke to an eerie feeling. I was generally a deep sleeper, but for some reason, I jolted awake that night. It was a feeling as if something was watching me. My room was dimly lit by the faint glow of the nightlight, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Dad had put his foot down and told me I couldn't sleep with the lights on anymore, so that's why I was only a nightlight. I turned my gaze towards the window, and there, in the moonlight, I saw a face. It was so pale and hollow looking, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I remember clearly, it didn't have any expression. It just stared at me with those empty, black, hollow eyes. My heart raced, and a chill ran down my spine as our eyes met, or at least what I think was its eyes. The face seemed to press closer against the window pane, distorted by the glass. I rubbed my eyes thinking it was just the trick of the shadows or my tired imagination playing tricks with me. But when I looked again, it was still there, hauntingly clear and terrifyingly real. I could see its dark pits for eyes staring into mine. I couldn't move, and I couldn't look away. "Mom, Dad," I screamed, unable to look away. They rushed to my room, worry etched on their faces. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mum asked, her voice filled with concern. I pointed to the window, my voice shaking. Look at the window." Dad approached the window, but there was nothing there, just the moonlight streaming in. He assured me it was just my imagination, a bad dream that lingered after I woke up. But I knew what I saw. That pale, haunting face had to be real. After that night, even though it made the room darker, I made sure to close my curtains. From that night on, the haunting escalated. That ghostly face became a reoccurring presence. Sometimes at the window, not mine of course because I had the curtains closed, and also sometimes in the corners of my room. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow me, and I could hear faint whispers in the stillness of the night. I'll never forget that face. That blank, soulless expression. And the haunting didn't stop there. My toys would start laughing and talking on their own. I couldn't take it anymore, so I told my parents everything. They agreed that strange things had been happening around the house for some time now, and they believed what I said, and came to the decision that we should move. On our last night in that house, the haunting escalated. Objects flew around the room and the air turned icy cold. In the end, we just took what we needed and waited out the night in the car, praying for the morning to come soon. It was never so bad during the daytime, so we at least had then to take the rest of our stuff out. We moved to a new place, and all the weird happenings stopped. It was such a relief. One thing's for sure. I'm so glad we don't live in that house anymore.
This is 100% completely true story. I'm quite a skeptical person and don't believe in superstitions. However, based on my own past experiences, I do believe that ghosts or some part of paranormal entities exist in this world. However, at the same time, I think some people make up stories, or some explainable thing happens that is mistaken for a paranormal encounter. When I was smaller, we lived in a typical suburban house with a pool and a very large yard. I wouldn't call the house haunted, but there were a few weird things going on that I'd like to share. This happened to me around the ages of 7 to 10 years of age, as we moved out to another town when I was 10. There were 3 activities that took place. From the living room, you could see out to the dining room. There was a 3-seater couch that sort of defined the bounds of the 2 spaces. I initially thought my eyes were playing a trick, but occasionally while playing in the living room, I would notice a sort of boy walk past the couch. However, you would see nothing but only the top of his head. Think of Dennis the Menace haircut, except his hair was more of a hazelnut color. I would see this boy walking past the couch at least weekly. It looked exactly like another person would. It was only some months later when my mother was sitting with me in the living room, both staring out towards the dining room, that I noticed the boy's head walk past the couch, and my mother reacted to it and asked if I had seen a child walk past. That was when I told her that I see him fairly often, but I don't ever see any other part of him. She also admitted she would see something from the corner of her eye at times, but thought it was her imagination. Later on, my brother, who's a year younger, also confirmed he would see the boy. It was really weird, because it was just the top of his head you would see. He would never see his eyes, he would never stop. He never ever called out to anyone or made a sound. Always just a head walking past the couch. I never felt any presence or anything weird. The second thing that would happen, which took place a couple of times a year, was that when I would play outside, I would hear someone call my name. It was more of a feminine voice, and it was like a loud whisper, but from a distance. This always happened when I was alone in the yard. It was definitely not my mother, as sometimes my mother had gone out shopping or was at work. I always felt like I was being watched, and that the air would become colder. This would happen even during the day, and it always happened outside of the house. I don't ever recall it taking place inside. The last thing that would happen is I saw shadows that moved. Shadow people, according to Reddit. Only some years later, I found out that my brother also regularly saw them. I once brought it up with my mother, who used to say it was from watching too much television, or just my mind playing tricks. Now, the shadows were always out of the corner of my eyes. Like, as soon as you try to focus on them, they would disappear around corners. Or if I was walking down the passageway and I turn around, I would see closer to me, about a meter or so, but it would run away and disappear around the corner or behind a door. It felt as if I caught them red-handed, and they would scurry away as they were afraid to be seen. It was always one shadow at a time, but I got the feeling it was different shadow beings, not one constant one. They were slightly skinny, and I could never see the outline of any clothing items. I never saw shadows anywhere except for that house. My brother was the only other person to see them. My parents never did. I put that down to being that kids are more sensitive to paranormal encounters.
This happened when I was in elementary school. I think that I was in year 6, roughly 11 years old. My parents were called away urgently because one of my aunties or uncles were in need of some urgent childcare. They didn't go into the full details of why they had to go away, but I knew it was something serious. I remember it was a Saturday and my parents planned to leave at dusk. I was asked to keep an eye on my cousins since I was the eldest. I had a choice to go with my parents, and I wish I did, but it seemed way more fun to stay at home with my cousins. The cousins in question were a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. They were siblings. They kept nagging me to go and play with them. I couldn't take it anymore, and I buckled to the persistent requests from my little cousins. The younger sibling demanded a game of hide and seek. I didn't mind that. I wasn't too cool for a game of hide and seek. I thought that if I let them go and hide, I would have a couple of seconds peace while I counted down before I had to go and find them. I counted down from 50 and then I went to find them. My male cousin, the older sibling, hid in a nearby wardrobe, so he was easy to find. His sister, however, proved incredibly difficult to find. I couldn't really be bothered to search every place in the house, so I thought if I called out to her, I would be able to find her. I walked around the house, asking aloud, "Are you ready?" And because she was little and didn't really understand the premise of the game, she would enthusiastically answer, "Yes, I am." It sounded like she was hiding under the bed. I bent down as silently as I could and looked under the bed, but there was no one there. Strange. I called out again, "Are you ready?" And then I heard suppressed laughter coming from a wardrobe, a different one to the one I had found my cousin in. I threw open the door with a smile, and then frowned when I found it empty. At this point, her brother joined the hunt. She was a good hider, I'll give her that. We couldn't find her. After a few more minutes of searching, I started to feel uneasy. I got a little scared for her, so I called out to her one more time. "I surrender, you win, you're the champion, can you come out now?" I heard the bathroom door creak, and then I saw her smiling, victorious face. I just looked in the bathroom. It was pretty strange. I asked her outright, where was she hiding? After she stopped celebrating her victory over me, she replied, "That's the secret." We decided to play a board game after that. All the while, I couldn't get my mind off of what had just happened. It was stuck in my head, like, where the hell was she hiding? Later that night, my cousin's father came to pick up his children. Since the hour had grown late, I decided to take myself to bed. Looking back on it, why didn't I just go to their house? I'll still never understand that. While in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that game of hide and seek. I think I must have dozed off. I heard a voice. You know, that dreamlike state right before you plunge into a deep sleep. You're hovering on the edge of consciousness. I was in that moment, and then I heard something. A voice from within my dark bedroom. "Are you ready?" I jolted awake, like that feeling you have when you're in that dreamlike state, where you feel yourself falling, and then you're suddenly awake. I heard it again. "Are you ready?" It was very, very faint, but I heard it. It was there. That voice didn't belong to either of my cousins, and it wasn't a young voice. I covered myself from head to toe in my duvet and blankets. That voice sounded old. It sounded adult and female. I heard it again. It sounded like it was getting closer. My body started involuntarily shaking. Panic gripped me. My heart was thumping. "Are you ready?" I couldn't reply like my cousin did. I couldn't just say, "Yes, I am." I didn't know what that would entail. I didn't know what would happen if I did that. I felt so scared and stressed, and I was still young, so the only logical answer that came to the forefront of my mind was, "No, I'm not ready." I heard that old woman voice whisper somewhere close to my bed in a voice as raspy as a mosquito. "Are you ready. I felt as if I was about to be found in a game of hide and seek I didn't even enter into. This was the moment. The duvet and blankets were vigorously thrown upwards from my head. I screwed my eyes as tightly shut as I could. I let out the loudest scream I had ever heard. I fearfully opened my eyes after a few seconds and saw nothing but my dark and empty bedroom. I have no idea what the hell that was. I stayed up until my parents got home, absolutely petrified.
I have lived in Connecticut for the majority of my adult life, mostly in this house in a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood. I moved into this house when I was about 9 years old and lived there till I was 23. I remember being a little weirded out by the house from the day we moved in. As a kid, every so often, I would just feel like I was being watched on occasion. Fast forward to when I was about 14. There were many changes going on in my life. My older brother moved away to college. Both my grandparents became very ill and caused a lot of financial stress on my parents, as they were spending a lot of money to assist them with medical care, recovery, rehabilitation, etc. My first encounter, around when I was 14 to 15, came one night where I woke up very early in the morning to the sound of very heavy breathing, which sounded like it was coming from my room. I laid motionless in bed for what seemed like an eternity as the breathing continued, until I gathered the courage to sit up. When I sat up, the breathing noise left my room, but I could hear it in different parts of the house, moving from my brother's room to my parents' room, going back and forth until about 6 a.m. when my father woke up to go to work. I asked my parents and siblings about the noise, and they just ignored it and said I was dreaming or that it was someone snoring. This is the second occurrence, and it happened about 6 months to a year later. It came very early in the morning, where I woke up from dead sleep, unable to move any part of my body except for my head, very slightly. Several seconds later, I saw a face. It appeared very skeletal. It was inches from my face, and this being just stayed there and smiled very menacingly, until I was able to faintly utter Jesus' name, which directly after I was able to move every part of my body almost immediately again. I told my parents about this encounter the next morning, which they again dismissed as a dream or sleep paralysis. Fast forward to when I was about 23. From 15 to 23, I never really experienced anything like either of these things again, except for a few bouts of the feeling of being watched. I served in the military and returned home for a few years while I was in school and whatnot, and started dating my now wife. She frequently slept over in this house while we were dating, but due to it being a very strict Christian household, we were prohibited from sleeping in the same room. One night she was sleeping over and I was getting her room ready for the night, when she divulged to me that she didn't like sleeping downstairs alone. Curious, I asked why. To which she said that someone walks around upstairs all night long. I told her that it was probably my younger brother who usually stayed up late at night watching TV or playing video games, or my father getting ready for work who left early in the morning. She rejected this idea and adamantly said that it was all night long, just someone or something walking back and forth. She specified that the noise came from the upstairs living room, which, as a side note, was the running joke in the family that this specific living room was never used by anyone, and definitely not anyone all night long pacing back and forth. She went on to tell me that she would sometimes hear very loud breathing coming from downstairs and moving around the house at random times and intervals. The same heavy breathing noise I was hearing all those years ago. Long story short, we don't live in that house anymore.
My parents were both military. They were relocated to Austin, Texas in '92. Something was delayed and their housing was put on hold. So the people in charge placed my parents into temporary housing. To my mother's horror, it was a sculty, very dated double-wide tin trailer, which was mouldy, roach and rodent infested, and the windows leaked and the place couldn't hold heat. Since my dad had to travel more than an hour to and from the base, Mom was left alone for hours at night. She, one night, decided she wasn't going to wait up for my dad and turned in early. She got dressed for bed, turned on the hall light for my dad and turned out her light and laid down. Just after she closed her eyes, she let out a sigh after her head hit the pillow, and all went quiet. Though suddenly she heard a shuffle sound. She was kind of confused. Dad's truck wasn't heard coming into the driveway, so he definitely wasn't home. Mum held her breath to listen, and the shuffle sound was like footsteps, with the heel lazily sliding to the floor with each step. Mum had her back to the bedroom door, and the footsteps were just wandering down the hall. It entered the bedroom. Mum propped herself on her elbows and looked over her shoulder. The light in the hall was glowing into the bedroom. Nothing was there, but the shuffle sound was right there by the bed now. Mum tried to focus on where the noise was coming from. Then, whatever it was, sat on the bed. There was nothing on the bed except for a divot on the comforter, as if someone was sitting right there in bed. Mum continued to hold her breath, calmly got up, walked over and switched on the light and shut the door behind her and fell asleep on the couch. My parents stayed in the place for just 2 months, and nothing, fortunately, ever happened again. I have another story I wish to share. I had a co-worker called John who grew up closely to the Native American culture. So John was taught about spirits. The subject of the paranormal does not faze him. When he moved into a new house, something was different about it. It didn't bother him enough to be concerned about anything, he just got on with his life. Though after his first week, John felt pretty rubbish about being there, kind of feeling like he had to look around his environment a little bit more than usual. Trying to lounge in his living room in the same evening, there was a knock at his front door. It was a firm knock, but not urgent. He got up, muted the TV, and went to answer it. When he got to the door and opened up, no one was there. There were no passing cars, it was a dead-end driveway, and he only had 2 neighbors. They were about a 3-minute walk apart. There was no one. John shut the door and went back to his chair. Just as he pressed on mute, the knock happened again. It was the same firm knock. He frowned and walked back over. But again, there was no one. He shut the door and waited this time. It's a prank, friggin' kids, he thought. But not a minute later the knock happened, and he swung the door open, and there was no one there. Just an open lawn, no trees or shrubs for hiding. He sighed, agitated but cautious, closed the door without letting go of the knob, even faster than before it knocked again. John, this time, was very agitated and really flung the door open. There definitely wasn't any time for kids to try and vanish into the darkness. John was now angry. "If you don't stop this right now, I'm gonna get you." He stepped outside his door, breathed in the fresh air and listened. Nothing. John sighed in annoyance and went back inside. Nothing ever happened again. There is one final story I wish to share. Sasha had just ended a relationship. She needed to move quickly and in a hurry. A friend of hers knew a landlord who had just opened up a double wide for rent on one of their properties, so it was perfect timing. Sasha signed the paperwork unseen, got the keys immediately and started moving in. The trailer was spacious. You walked into a large living space. The kitchen had an open counter bar and connected dining. Perfect, she thought. As soon as she started sorting boxes by assigned rooms, Sasha really looked around the home. To the left of the living room from the front door was a long hallway, 1 bedroom to the right, the bathroom to the left, and down the hall the master bedroom. Going to the master bedroom, to set things up was the first thing Sasha noticed when she was taken by surprise. There on the wall was something odd. It was yarn and sticks. Macrame decorations? She got closer and realized it was very primitive, a crudely wrapped dream catcher. It's a hoop, and it looked like it was about to snap. The yarn was covered in cobwebs. Weaved into the yarn were your basic plastic junk beads from a kid's craft box, and there were strands of yarn hanging and twisted together in multiple knots with a chicken's foot. Gross, she thought, and tossed it out into the trash. Well, she didn't get to stay in her new place for the first 2 days. She had to travel a distance between her old home and stayed with her parents, who had kept her dog for the transition time. But Sasha did get a chance to continue to unpack between work and her parents' house. On the 3rd day, everything was put together enough. She collected her dog and went straight to her new home for the first full night's stay. All evening, Sasha was unpacking. By the time she stopped and looked at the time, it was 2:30 a.m., bedtime. All the lights were turned off and she settled in her room with some YouTube and her dog on the bed. At 3 a.m., Sasha noticed her dog staring out the bedroom door. He is alert, kind of tense looking. Sasha put her phone down, trying to focus on her own scenes, when she heard it. Small, evenly timed thuds. It was faint, but Sasha could hear someone walking around her living room. She lived alone. The doors and windows were locked, or at least they should have been. There's no way anyone could have broken in without making much more noise. Fear tightened in her chest. Then the footsteps stopped, and suddenly, the steps came thudding down the hallway. She sat straight up in bed, her dog barking, hackles raised, but refused to leave her side. The thud of running feet came to a stop right at her bedroom door. Sasha then heard laughter, a giggle of a small child, and then feet running again down the hallway. "Screw this," Sasha said. She got up, ran to her door, slammed it shut, slid her dresser across the entry, and the next morning she found small childlike sized handprints all over the window in the living room. It wasn't her imagination from staying up late, so it seemed. She called a friend who knew a girl who would do house cleanses with sage and prayer. It worked, because after that she never found or heard anything inexplicable again. It wasn't until I brought up the subject of voodoo religion, of how hanging a chicken's foot above your door is supposed to ward off evil. So Sasha believes that maybe the crusty or dream catcher was holding something at bay. Nothing further ever happened between the cleansing, but still, I kind of wonder about the old dream catcher, possibly warding away a spirit who couldn't rest.
I bought an old house that needed renovations. The previous owner was the adult daughter of an elderly lady who died in the house, and she didn't want to deal with her mother's belongings or the cleanup. I've never been squeamish about dealing with other people's property. At one point, you could tell she took a lot of care of her home, but just got overwhelmed with all the cleaning and maintenance. The elderly lady died at the wooden kitchen nook. I've always felt watched when I was inside the kitchen, but it was never a malicious feeling. Imagine a country-style 1950s style home, and I wanted to keep the overall style and vibe, but make sure I had everything up to date. I like my fancy appliances. I kept the old furniture, took it outside, and treated it with wood finisher to keep it looking nice. The more work I did on the house, the more active the ghost became. I woke up and wandered into the kitchen at night time to get a cup of tea, when I saw a little old lady standing at the stove. She was barely 5 feet tall, hunched over, with grey hair, and she was semi-transparent. I gasped when I saw her, and she disappeared. It felt uncomfortably cold where she had been standing, and I felt uneasy while I turned on the kettle. The water boiled, and I looked around the empty, quiet kitchen. She got more active the more renovations were done. I kept and fixed up a lot of her belongings. In one of the kitchen units I found photo albums, letters from loved ones, and the random things she liked. I couldn't keep everything. I messaged her daughter and asked if she wanted any of the personal effects. She hesitated, asked if it would be too much trouble, and then made the drive down. She cried when she saw the new version of the place, and I showed her around. Since she had a long drive home, I asked her if she wanted a cup of tea and a chat. I wanted to know more, and maybe even give the ghost mom a chance to speak to her daughter. She told me about the memories of her mother. The ghost didn't speak or do anything while she was there. It felt like, almost, when she left, that the ghost and even the house had changed toward me. I felt like the ghost welcomed me into the home, almost happy I was there. Now, everything was freezing cold. Not the brief chills I would occasionally get from being in certain places. The worst and the most noticeable place was the kitchen, and especially at the kitchen nook. I stopped using it altogether. It used to be a bright and happy home. I contacted a medium to try to speak with her, so I could find out what I did wrong and if there was anything I could do to help. The medium walked around the house and told me the ghost was in the kitchen. I already knew this. The ghost didn't want to speak to her. The medium told me the ghost wasn't happy with her daughter and was angry she was in the house. I asked why. She didn't say. I felt like I didn't belong in the house anymore, that it wasn't mine, that I was a stranger and I was trespassing. The uneasy feeling spread to every part of the house, and I started to see her standing at the end of my bed, angry at me. She never said anything. I didn't know what to do, and it went on for months before I decided to speak to someone. I was exhausted, and a shadow of my former self. No energy, and I stopped being who I was. I spoke to a group about a possible exorcism, and they said they needed to do an investigation. It turns out the daughter was abusive towards her mother, and was constantly trying to steal her money or the house from under her. I didn't get that impression from her. All I saw was a loving and sad daughter who couldn't stand to be in the home. Either way, I already bought the house and need to be able to live here comfortably. One night, when the spirit appeared at the end of my bed, I told her I wasn't her daughter and wanted things to go back to the way they were. She didn't stop. The next night I tried it again. It didn't work. I messaged the daughter and tried to discover what the backstory actually was. She thanked me again for giving her the personal effects and repeatedly told me how grateful she was. I thought the ghost was perhaps overreacting to things and needed to move on from what happened. Then she asked if I had found any valuables. This was the first time she had ever asked something like this. I told her I hadn't. The daughter mentioned her mother keeping things from her in the past and how she wanted what she was owed, things that I now owed her. I told her I bought the house as is, with all the possessions inside, and I technically didn't need to send or give her anything. She started saying that she was going to take the house back and get everything in the house. I blocked her, and I understand her mother's anger now. I apologized out loud in the empty house, and the ghost of the elderly woman seemed to be satisfied with that. She didn't appear at the end of my bed anymore, and the house lost the horrible chill it had. I was able to rest and relax. I never saw her ghost again, and it lost the warmth it had when I first moved in. It was sad. I missed her, but figured this was the next best option. Every so often, I have a feeling she's watching me from the kitchen nook, and I say good morning to her.
This is a scary experience which happened to me a very long time ago. I think when I was only about 5 or maybe 6 years old. At that time, myself and my parents were living in an apartment. On that day, I remember that I had gone to my grandfather's house to play. I remember coming back at maybe 9 o'clock at night. So, I came back from my grandfather's house and I was reading a picture book by myself for a little while. But my mother came in and she said to me, "It's already 10 o'clock. Tomorrow is kindergarten, so go to bed." I begin getting ready for bed, but my mother yells at me again, "Go to the bathroom and brush your teeth." Okay, got it. I toddled off to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and that was that. Okay, ready for bed. When I came out of the bathroom, however, somehow the lights are all turned off in the washroom and in the living room. My father has always been a bit of a prankster. He would often do these things to me. It was dark and scary, so I tried to make my way back to my room, little by little. But after a few steps into the darkness, I do not feel right. I see something dark. There are no lights on in this apartment. It should be so dark that I cannot see anything. But I can see something black approaching me. Knowing my father, of course, my first instinct was to assume that it was him playing some kind of trick on me. So I call out, "Dad, what are you doing?" I called out very loud, so I know that he must have heard me. But I did not receive any reply. As this dark figure begins getting closer to me, I notice there is another one right beside it. "Mum?" I call out. But again, there is no reply. The two of them were getting closer, little by little. My eyes should have adjusted to the dark at this point. But no. Still, these two only look pitch black. And that's when I noticed it. These two, they were awfully big. I mean, big enough that their heads are almost touching the ceiling. It was almost 2 meters to the ceiling. Slowly, they continue to shuffle, closer and closer to me. I hate it. I begin to take slow steps backwards, as at this point, I am all but certain that these are not my parents. And that is when I notice their faces. It's very difficult to describe. One of them had a sharp head, almost pointed. If you could imagine the triangle head of Silent Hill, maybe you'll have some idea. The other one, its head is round, and it is huge. And both of these things, they didn't have any faces. Maybe I just couldn't see it because it was pitch black. But I could swear, where the face should be, it's just a pure blank slate. So, these two, they continue to approach me until they are standing right in front of me. I begin to reach out to my side, looking behind me, looking for anything. I don't know why. I guess my instinct's taking over. That pointed head figure, he began to lurch forward now, bringing that awful head closer and closer to me. I pressed my back against the wall, trying desperately to move further away from this terrible thing. And then, the inevitable moment finally came. That strange head touched my own. In that single moment, I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that what I had just come into contact with was something purely, absolutely evil. I ran away, pushing past between these two awful things and running around our little apartment, screaming, crying for my parents. I run so fast to my parents' room. The bedroom door was closed, but when I open the door, the lights, they are now all turned on. just like they normally would be. And my parents, they are looking at me. My father was grinning at me. "Were you afraid of the dark, son?" he asked me. But because I was too hysterical to answer that properly, I just shouted at him. The sharp head, the pointed head, it touched me. And the round head, the big head. My cries came out in disjointed and nonsensical ramblings. But I was a scared kid. I had just seen something not of this earth. Something that should never be seen on this side of the earth. Something I knew undoubtedly had terrible, malicious intentions. And for all I knew, was still here with us. I tried to talk to my parents, but I could not get my words out. I tried to pull on my parents' hands and show them. I pleaded with them, "Please, just come and look." My parents turned on the light. "Look, there is nothing," my father assured me. I really did try to calm down, but I couldn't. I ran around, looking everywhere for where these things may have gone. But there was nothing. No black figures, nothing hiding behind curtains or underneath beds or lurking inside closets. I continued to plead my case. I assured my parents I really had seen them. But the longer I stood there, the more I began to even doubt my own words. So that's my story. I'm sorry there's no follow-up. No sinister twist. No 1,000 years of curses or anything like that to follow. Life went on as normal. Boring and mundane. But I was absolutely scared to death that night. And I learned a terrible truth. That the evils of this world, indeed, do not lurk in closets or underneath beds, but rather in plain sight, right there, in front of us, just waiting for the moment that somebody will turn out the lights.
I must have been 7 to 8 years old when I had my first and probably the only encounter with the supernatural. My father got transferred to Dehradun from Almora when I was 7 or 8. We moved to a rented place. Our landlord seemed sweet and helpful at first, but they were not like that at all. After a week or so, my mother started feeling uncomfortable in the house. Things would fly off the shelf on their own. Once a glass broke on my mom's hand and it made a cut as if someone deliberately cut my mom's hand. Our landlord's wife used to talk nicely with my dad, saying stuff like, "Our family is the best," but would go tell my mom that we need to leave as we are not welcomed right after my dad would leave for work. She was trying to drive a wedge between my mom and my dad. Things started to go a bit south, but we also did our research. Then, the entire horrific story came out, including black magic. Before us, there was a couple that used to live in the same house. The landlords would play the same game with them like they played with my dad and mom. This led to a huge fight between the couple, and the wife literally killed herself by burning herself alive. The situation worsened as the landlord's wife used to do black magic. She used black magic to control the guy and brainwash the man into not believing his own wife. It has been said that the husband was so brainwashed that he did nothing to save his wife and watched her burn alive right in front of him. When we came in, we knew nothing and just moved in. After my mom started experiencing things, I started seeing things as well. I used to see a Batman action figure everywhere at night, even on my bed when I didn't even have any action figures back then. I was a car kid always. Once I saw a giant doll in front of my cabinet. It was like 5 to 6 feet tall. It was there the whole night. It was as if something wanted us out of the house. I don't know whether it was the woman who died or because of black magic we were seeing things, but there was a very strong and obvious presence. I am 30 now, but we still sometimes visit Derridune, and that house is now empty. Even the landlords have sold off the place and went elsewhere. No new renter was able to live there for more than 2 months. We lived there for not more than 4 months.
It was the summer of 1987, and I was 17 years of age when this experience occurred. I lived at my aunt's house, and I decided that I was going to visit my sister, but we both lived in the same city that summer. My sister at that time was married and had 2 small children, and she and her family lived in a house with an attached farm to it. The best way that I could describe this house is like an old-fashioned redwood farmhouse, and though it was in the city, it was surrounded by trees, and in the back were a couple of old shacks and chicken coops, but it didn't have any chickens. Although my sister had a front door, they always preferred everyone to use the side door. And as you walked in, immediately to the right was a doorway that led to a long, narrow, and dark, creepy closet. And just inside the doorway and to the right was a bathroom. And towards the end of the closet was another door that led to a barn. The side door opened into the kitchen though, and immediately there was a dining room, and if you walked in there, to your right there would be a big old living room, and then another right would be a bedroom and another bathroom. Just walking into that place gave me the creeps. I don't know why at that time, but it just really did. My sister never really told me anything about the history of the house, and I don't know if she didn't know or just thought nothing of it and didn't mention it to me. Well, like I said, on this particular day, I went to go and visit her. While she was doing her laundry, I decided that I would go and explore because I was getting bored. Little did I know at that time that my boredom and my curiosity could have never prepared me for what I was about to see, and it would leave an image in my mind that I would never forget. Anyway, after using the restroom, I walked down the long dark closet to the door that would lead me outside into the barn. And for some reason, as I approached that door, I went to open it, and then I just froze. Something told me not to open that door, but I didn't listen to my gut feeling. As I opened the door, you had to step down 2 steps, and I did this. I turned, and for whatever reason, I looked up into the loft, and there was a guy up there with a rope in his hand. It was almost like he was staring right into my soul, even though I knew it wasn't me he was looking at. But either way, I just stood there frozen, unable to say anything. I watched as the guy put the rope around his neck, and then he jumped. I heard the rope tighten and the sickening snap of his neck as I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it was going to explode. I don't remember how long I was there, watching the ghost just swinging.
Minions. My experience with shadow figures and the house I lived in. What are minions? Minions is the name I gave them, but many people, rightfully so, call them shadowy figures. No matter what time period the story emerges from, the story or description given is the same. someone experiencing unexplained activity in their house, in most cases, malevolent activity, or reports seeing shadowy figures moving out of the corner of their eyes. The Bothell house is no exception. I remember the first time I saw one, and eventually 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. I was sitting in my office upstairs, bouncing between surfing the internet and watching TV. By this time, we had multiple activities. Objects catching fire, Bibles catching fire, small, medium, and large objects thrown, loud bangs, phantom footsteps, door slams, wall tapping, lights going off and on by themselves, bed sheets yanked clean off you while you're sleeping. These are the signs of a poltergeist infestation. So is seeing shadowy figures out of the corner of your eye. There I am, watching TV, minding my own business, which, by the way, is the perfect time for poltergeists to do something. And they do. My office upstairs. The layout is structured in a way where I can see the upstairs hallway and my doorway at all times while watching TV. And that's when it happened, from left to right. I'm watching TV, and all of a sudden, I see movement out of the corner of my left eye. I turn in the direction of the movement. The brain does that instinctively. And there it is. This miniature creature looking like a gremlin creeps across my doorway, sort of hunched over and yet standing tall, walking stilted-like, from left to right until it crosses the complete doorway. It's gone from being in my peripheral view to being in my complete view. I'm not quite sure what it is I'm seeing. In my opinion, that's the human brain in denial as to what's really happening, in denial of what it's actually seeing. This thing, for lack of a better word, tiptoes across my doorway until it gets to the next bedroom to the right of me and disappears. I got up a few seconds later to investigate. I go to the room. I saw whatever it was creeping into, and of course, nothing is there. There will be multiple occurrences such as this in the Bothell house. Anyone who's seen a shadow figure will tell you there's nothing like the first time. The first time, like most poltergeist incidents, breaks the seal. What do I mean by that? Weeks after the incident, I began seeing more than one shadowy figure. Oh yeah, multiple shadowy figures. No longer moving left to right. No. Now walking directly towards me. But this is the interesting part. As they move closer to you, it looks like they're moving further away and vice versa. For reasons I can't explain, go in and out of frame, meaning they disappear and reappear, sometimes closer to you when they originally appeared. Sometimes they reappear further away. Why is that? But why the term minions? Well, based on what I've seen, and I've seen a lot, these shadowy figures, I believe, were responsible for 85% of the geist activity in our house. I believe minions, which some call shadowy figures, are responsible for the majority of poltergeist activities. The EVP's unexplained voices captured by paranormal teams and parapsychologists from the US and UK, over 600 plus to be exact, suggest these shadowy figures, i.e. minions, work in tandem. They groupthink. They're the ones that poke me at night while sleeping. They pull sheets clean off the bed while I'm still sleeping. They're responsible for the mattress indentations, the pulsating I feel coming from my bed mattress and pillow. Yes, pulsating like a heartbeat. Indentations like invisible paw prints, like a stealth invisible small pet, like a small cat or a small dog making its way towards you while you're laying in bed. Awake or asleep, it doesn't matter. You feel the indentation nonetheless until it reaches you. Then suddenly, a swoosh feeling. I liken it to touching those electric cattle fences that farmers and ranchers use to control their cattle. I touched one by accident as a kid. The swoosh I felt after whatever it was reached me. That sudden jolt, not painful, but very uncomfortable, frozen, numbing, tingling, and in some instances, euphoric, if that makes sense. But the biggest shock of all, the one that sort of relieved me the second I heard about it, and rightfully so, someone else, the previous tenant at that, experienced the same thing is proof I'm not crazy. When I finally got a hold of one of the previous tenants of the Bothell house, a family that lived in the house about 5 years ago before we did, the mom told me her son saw shadowy figures out of the corner of his eye. His bedroom is now my office. But it gets scarier. In 2014, when she finally reached out to me, she said he occasionally tells her he still sees them out of the corner of his eye today. 5 years later, ladies and gentlemen, after they moved out of the Bothell house, that worried me. And guess what? 7 years after moving out of the Bothell house, I still occasionally see them, as do some of my friends who associate with me, especially those who have a self-sense of righteousness. Make of that what you will.
This happened to my sister and I when we were pretty young. I was between 6 and 8, and my sister, she's 2 years younger than me. We lived in a haunted house for about 2 years. It was only very recently that my dad finally told me the reason we moved was actually because of all the activity that was happening in the house. Now, this house we moved into was old. It was built in the 1920s at least, and needed work. My dad's a carpenter and had built so many houses over the years. Renovations were nothing new to Mum and Dad. What is it that they say about renos? That it can awaken the ghosts or entities that once were in the house. Now, I don't know the history of the house, and trust me, I have looked it up so many times, and there's not really a lot I can actually find. One thing I have found is that no one lives there for very long, and that quite often the house sells for a very low amount of money. I don't know about you, but that just screams haunted. This house felt off to me, especially the rooms further towards the back of the house. 3 rooms in particular were horrible, and I felt afraid to go into them, even in the daytime. It was so much worse at night. I remember feeling dread every single night the sun went down. My sister and I experienced several things in this house with the paranormal, but this one has stayed with us. It is by far the worst thing that ever happened. So this old house had a wine cellar, which was accessed from the backyard. This wine cellar also happened to be directly underneath these rooms that made me feel uncomfortable. The overall layout of the house was off and just felt wrong, like things were in the wrong spot. I was a kid, so I figured it was normal. So we were down there in the cellar playing with our dog Pebbles. Now, for the layout of this cellar, it was fairly big. My dad had knocked out a wall down there too, making it more open. There was an opening on the south side, which was the entrance, and on the west side was a wall of bricks with the decorative holes in them so light would filter in. The cellar itself was divided into 2 rooms. The first section was where we were playing with our dog, and the second, which had a wall with a crawl space or hole in the wall that led into underneath of the house and each room. This was to gain access to the wiring to the heated flooring. So, as I said, we were playing with our dog when all of a sudden, I remember feeling quite uneasy and the need to just look up, and there in the dark area of the cellar stood a large figure. This figure was almost like the outline of a really big man, but I couldn't properly make out any features. Our dog was barking and my sister and I just stared at it. We were terrified. We somehow knew it wasn't a person, and the fear that I felt was like nothing I had ever felt. Even thinking about it now sometimes scares me. I froze and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't say anything. I just stood there with my sister. Now, I have spoken to her recently too, and she said she remembers it having yellow eyes. I remember the height and the outline of its shoulders. The most terrifying part was the way it looked at us. It gave us the most terrifying grin. It was like it wanted to hurt us. We stood there staring at its grin, and to this day, neither of us can get it out of our head. It tilted its head back, as if it gestured with its head, and then moved its hand like it was trying to beckon for us to follow him further into the darkness of the cellar. My little sister grabbed me and we ran out of there. I don't think I would have been able to move if it wasn't for her. It was the scariest thing that happened to us while we were in that house, and I was glad when we moved 2 years later. Since then, we've always referred to it as the demon in the cellar.
We purchased this house that was built in the 1920s. It's pretty charming on the outside, and it's technically 3 stories. Most of the experiences have happened in the basement where my girlfriend and I stay, but aren't limited to that area. The basement is essentially its own apartment. It has a bedroom with 2 walk-in closets, a laundry room, a kitchen, a bathroom, a wine cellar, a maintenance room, and a living room area. When me and my girlfriend first moved in with her mother, we had the basement to ourselves. Anyways, first night of moving in, we both had night terrors of an old frail lady in white, walking around in front of the bedroom. We were creeped out, but just figured it was nothing. A few nights later, we were getting more stuff unpacked and organized in one of the walk-in closets, and we both heard whispers right next to our ears. My girlfriend ignored it, but right after I said, "Did you just hear that?" and repeated the whisper sound, she got freaked out because she had heard the exact same noise. Fast forward to maybe a month or 2 in, we heard shuffling upstairs, almost like someone walking around with slippers. Her mom wasn't home, so figured someone maybe broke in. Honestly, this house is old and likely an easy target for a break-in, but hadn't triggered the alarms or glass break detectors. I grabbed my Glock 19 and checked upstairs, and when I got to the stairs that lead to the 3rd floor, I could hear the shuffling right next to me. The shuffling was going up the stairs and eventually stopped when it got to the top. After this, the same thing happened again the following day. At this point, we're pretty confident the house is haunted. My girlfriend and I can feel it. We tried researching the previous owners, but really couldn't find much. But maybe I just haven't searched well enough. Fast forward to the next encounter. Me and my girlfriend were doing dry fire training in my living room late at night, on a weekend when my girlfriend's mom was out of town. My girlfriend's mom leaves every other weekend to go hang out with her boyfriend, and he comes over on the weekends that she doesn't visit him. I'm a stickler for firearm safety. I triple check every firearm to ensure it's unloaded, as well as the magazines before I train, and I make sure to leave the ammunition in another room while I'm doing my dry fire. So we're practicing draw stroke, proper presentation, getting to the wall, target transitions, and tactical/emergency reloads. And my girlfriend hears someone whisper, "Be careful," next to her ear while she's timing me. I didn't hear anything, so when she told me what she heard, I grabbed her and went to the room to load my firearm.
I got freaked out when she told me, because my first thought when she told me was that someone was breaking into my house and is whispering to their buddy to be careful. Keep in mind, it's 1 or 2 in the morning, and me and my girlfriend were on a nocturnal schedule for the weekend, so we can get more time under the night vision goggles. Anyways, she explains it was next to her ear and not coming from outside or anything like that, and I calmed down. Next encounter I had was by myself when I was getting ready to do the dishes. I had my earbuds in, and they have the ambient noise feature where you can still hear with them in. I heard a deep breath in my ear. It made me jump, and I turned around thinking it was my girlfriend trying to mess with me or something, but there was nothing there. I wasn't listening to music when it happened either, so I have no idea what it was. The last encounter we had was when my girlfriend and I were hanging out upstairs with her mom and boyfriend. We were just listening to music and having a couple of drinks, and I grabbed a glass of water and set it down on a small table to my left. The glass knocked over on its own, and we all watched it happen. Firstly, it tipped over towards the table, not off the table. I got up and tried jumping and stomping near the table to get it to wobble, and nothing happened. I tried to tip the glass over by bumping it, and it wobbled but didn't fall. I tried hitting the table with my knee or elbow, but nothing. When the glass fell on its own, it just knocked over. It didn't wobble first or anything. Everyone saw it happen, and nobody saw me bump it or anything, and I didn't feel myself bump into it either. To my knowledge, that's all that's happened so far. We kept trying to tell my mom's girlfriend about the weird stuff that's happened, but she wrote it all off until the night the glass tipped over on its own. It's possible she's had experiences, but if that's the case, she hadn't told us about any of them. Maybe these experiences are nothing, but maybe they are something. I have no idea.
We moved into my current house in 2018, and since then, weird things have been happening, especially to me. The summer I moved in, one night around 2 a.m., I was going to my kitchen to get a drink. I was walking down the stairs when I saw a group of people. I can't quite describe their faces because they were vague and it's dark, but they're around my table in the dining room. By the time I realized what I was seeing, they disappeared. In 2019, this time I was alone at home. I didn't have my dog yet, but I had my cat. I heard footsteps upstairs. I was in the living room. It was littler noises, small steps. So to be sure it wasn't my cat, I looked around me. Sure enough, he happened to be next to me on the couch. So, who was walking upstairs? After 30 minutes, I had the courage to go check. With a knife from the kitchen, of course. You never know. And in the end, nothing to explain it. Windows closed. Nothing moved. It was as if there was no one there, but I'm sure that's not the case. In 2020, I now have a dog. The first time I noticed this, it was dark. My sister and I were eating when all of a sudden my dog started barking, staring at the garden, as if to scare something or someone. I looked at my garden, and there was absolutely nothing. It's surely explainable, but personally, I didn't find anything. Each time, I never did. Fast forward to 2021. I never slept on my side, as I wasn't fond of not seeing what was behind me. Until one evening, I found myself facing the wall, lying on my side, without knowing what was behind me. I sort of woke up. I had that feeling that I've never had before. I was sure and certain that something was behind me. I could feel it. At that moment, all I wanted to do was scream. I was sure, though, if I did, something bad was going to happen to me. To be sure that I didn't have sleep paralysis, I tried to move my fingers, my legs, my feet. I managed to do all of that without any worries. And all of a sudden, I felt someone pushing me gently, so that instead of being on my ribs, I found myself on my stomach. I managed to prevent this thing from pushing me further. I don't know how, but I know that as soon as I did that, I fell asleep. It was from that moment that things got worse, penetrating my dreams for sure. In the summer of 2022, I was on vacation in Spain. During that vacation at night, I was not very calm. I had the impression that whatever was at home had followed me there too, appearing in my dreams as different things. Maybe they were just nightmares, but it all seemed connected. Those dreams continued. In February 2023, I woke up one morning with a huge scratch that suddenly appeared during my sleep. The mark was quite long. The scratch itself stung very much. A few days later, I had a red streak right across the same area of the scratch, again during my sleep. And again, a few days later, I woke up with a red line across my nose, which happened while I was sleeping. March 2023. I was in my bathroom. It was dark, around 12 a.m. I heard someone knock on the door 6 or 7 times before I replied that it was busy. Right after my answer, it stopped. When I came out, I thought it was my dad, so I went to his room before I saw that he was sleeping. My mom, too, so it wasn't them. My sister was also sleeping. My brother was at university, so I was the only one awake. So who could have knocked? 2023, at the end of April, exactly 2 days ago, I left to eat with friends around 12:40, returned at 6 p.m. As soon as I got back, the atmosphere changed. I felt uncomfortable, a feeling of fear without knowing why. As soon as I got home, I instantly noticed that my animals were behaving strangely. I went to my room to look for something, immediately realized something was wrong in there. Turns out the color of the LEDs had changed, which can't happen on its own unless somebody decides to do it. Going back down to my living room, I saw my animals were only staring at points near me, like protecting me or seeing something potentially dangerous that I can't see. Everywhere I go, my cat follows me, watching a different place right next to me. In the living room, sitting on the couch, both stare at a spot right next to me, side of my couch 2 meters away from me. From the dining room, they fixate on the kitchen and the cellar door. It was as if something was following me wherever I went, and my animals were following it. I really started to feel bad and scared when I saw that my cat, who basically doesn't like to stick around people, was following me everywhere. I was going to the toilet, he was coming. Absolutely anywhere and everywhere. My dog sat for 10 minutes staring at a particular spot, which is my kitchen, darkened by the evening. My cat staring at a particular spot right next to me. As soon as my parents got home, they stopped. I felt better. But the oddities, they won't stop.
This is a story of one of the scariest and strangest things that's ever happened to me. Let me go from the beginning. One morning, I got a lift to work with a lady that I work with. As we were driving, a native bird thuds into the windscreen and bounces off. We both got a fright. I wanted to stop to see if the bird was okay, but the driver insisted on driving on and that it was probably dead. I felt bad. I am an animal lover, but you know what it's like when you have to get to work and time is going to be tight for the entire day. That night I get home. I'm hanging out in my bedroom when I start hearing what sounds like a person making these groaning and crazy murmuring sounds right outside my bedroom window. I'm home alone and frozen in fear. The sound seems to move around my room to the back of the house, until it disappears after about 15 minutes. I didn't look out there because I was scared, but I've lived here for over 15 years and have never heard anything like it before or since. That night I wake up from a dead sleep and hear something hiss right in my face. But the creepiness does not end there. A few days later, I'm at someone's home doing some housework for them. They aren't home and I'm alone, and I go to pet their cat, who was sitting aloof on a chair by a huge window on the second-story floor that looks out over the driveway. And as I'm looking out the window, this poor little sparrow comes flying straight into the window right in front of me, knocks itself out cold, and falls quite a distance down onto the concrete driveway. I go down to the bird, which seems to be okay but just in shock. So in order to protect it from the cat, I make a nice little hospital bed for it in a shoebox with air holes and put it safely in the garage to recover for a while. I go upstairs to do the ironing. I'm in a room, standing with my back to the corner, with just the bookshelves behind me. It's very still, and it's a peaceful room with no draft, nor movement coming in from any direction. Nothing. I'm ironing a sheet and thinking back to the bird we hit on our way to work. The creepy as hell noises outside my bedroom, the hiss, and now this bird. Thinking that it's kind of creepy that this bird stuff keeps happening to me. At that very moment, I hear something slide off the bookshelf and fall to the carpet. Guess what it was? It was a heavy ornament of a bird. I stared at it for several seconds, completely perplexed. I promise you it did not just fall off the shelf, I specifically heard it slide. This thing was heavy. I went and let the bird go, which was fine, and after that, nothing else happened. This was about 5 years ago. Was the bird haunting me?
Apologies in advance as this is a little long-winded, but hopefully worth the read. I have lived in Connecticut for the majority of my adult life, mostly in this house in a quiet upper-middle-class neighborhood. I moved into this house when I was about 9 years old and lived there till I was 23, minus several years due to military active duty service. I remember being a little weirded out by the house from the day we moved in. As a kid, every so often I would just feel like I was being watched on occasion. Fast forward to when I was about 14. There were many changes going on in my life. My older brother moved away to college. Both my grandparents became very ill and caused a lot of financial stress to my parents, as they were spending a lot of money to assist them with medical care, recovery, rehab, etc. My first encounter, around when I was 14-15, came one night where I woke up very early in the morning to the sound of very heavy breathing, which sounded like it was coming from my room. I laid motionless in bed for what seemed like an eternity as the breathing continued until I gathered the courage to sit up. When I sat up, the breathing noise left my room, but I could hear it in different parts of the house, moving from my brother's room to my parents' room, back and forth, until about 6 a.m. when my father woke up to go to work. I asked my parents and siblings about the noise, and they just ignored it and said I was dreaming or that it was someone snoring. Second occurrence, about 6 months to 1 year later, came very early in the morning where I woke up from a dead sleep, unable to lift any part of my body except for my head, very slightly. Several seconds later I saw a face, appeared very skeletal, inches from my face, and this being just stayed there and smiled very menacingly until I was able to faintly utter Jesus' name, which directly after I was able to move every part of my body, almost immediately again. I told my parents about this encounter the next morning, which they again dismissed as a dream or sleep paralysis. Fast forward to when I was about 23. From 15 to 23, I never really experienced anything like either of these things again, except for a few bouts of the feeling of being watched. I served in the military and returned home for a few years while I was in school, etc., and started dating my now wife. She frequently slept over in this house while we were dating, but due to being a fairly strict Christian household, we were prohibited from sleeping in the same room. My girlfriend, now wife, slept over on average at least once a night for probably 6 months or so. One night she was sleeping over and I was getting her room ready for the night when she divulged to me that she didn't like sleeping downstairs alone. Curious, I asked why. As a side note, I never told her about any of the experience I had in this house for fear that she'd think I was crazy or messing with her. To which she said that someone walks around upstairs all night long. I told her it was probably my younger brother who usually stayed up late at night watching TV or playing video games, or my father getting ready for work who left early in the morning. She rejected this idea and adamantly said that it was all night long, just someone or something walking back and forth. She specified that the noise was coming from the upstairs living room, which as another side note was the running joke in the family that this specific living room was never used by anyone, and definitely not anyone all night long pacing back and forth. She went on to tell me that she would sometimes hear very loud breathing coming from downstairs and moving around the house at random times and intervals, the same heavy breathing noise I was hearing all those years ago. Long story short, we don't live in that house anymore. Thanks for reading.
I lived in an apartment which was built in 1989. Let me just go over the layout of the apartment because it's important. It's a pretty standard place, but it has a loft. It's not that big, to be honest. It's a little cramped in there. I don't really like my loft. I find it kind of, I don't know, creepy. There's a certain sense of vulnerability that comes with having a loft. I can't quite explain it, but by the end of this story, you'll know why they frightened me. It all started with a feeling one night after work. I haven't been able to shift this feeling. As soon as I come through the door, the first thing I see as I enter my apartment is my loft. I get the feeling that sometimes something is watching me from up there. At first, I just thought that it was my tired mind conjuring up something. I've been tired before, you know. This felt different. Little did I know, a grudge was born that day. Let me give you a POV. When you're in the bed in the loft, if you naturally look out or down, you'd see the entryway leading to the kitchen. Now naturally, when I sleep on my side, and therefore I face the entryway to the kitchen. Sometimes before sleep comes for me, I get the strong feeling that someone is looking up at me, staring at me from down there in the entryway. In uneasy times like that, I try to read or get myself to sleep as soon as possible. I hit the lights so I don't get distracted. I just use a little nightlight near my pillow to read my book. However, one night a deeper sense of unease crept over me. I felt as if something was wrong. I heard a noise coming from down below. The lights were off down there. I listened carefully. It sounded as if someone was exhaling. It definitely sounded like breathing. The second my mind understood that I was hearing breathing, I stayed deathly still. I was horrified. My heart began to thunder in my chest. I thought that there was an intruder in my home. The air in the room felt heavy and oppressive. It enveloped me. It was all around me. The room seemed to grow darker. I felt strange. I could still hear that noise. It resounded around the room below. It sounded closer. Beneath the loft there was a blind spot. I felt as if I pinpointed the spot where that breathing sound was coming from. Someone was down there, with their back against the wall. I managed to convince myself of that. When I imagined that, I shuddered. I drew my shoulders up to my chin and I held my covers tight. It was like a stalemate. I couldn't do anything, and the feeling that there was someone down there wouldn't go away. After a moment or two, the breathing sound suddenly stopped. I thought that it was all over, that I imagined the whole thing, and relief washed over me. Then, in that moment, I heard a familiar sound, a sound that I had heard many times before. It was the instantly recognizable sound of someone climbing the ladder which leads to the loft. It sounded exactly like someone climbing up towards me on that ladder. I was frozen with fear. Again, I was unable to move. My mind was a mess of fear and worry as I heard the sound of someone climbing up. Clarity came to me though swiftly. I guess this is what they call fight or flight. I made my mind up to deal with whoever was coming up. The sound continued. I was certain that I would see someone's head emerge in a matter of seconds. Those seconds came and went, although they felt as if they were hours. The tension was unbearable. Nothing came into view, and then the sound stopped. It stopped at the top of the ladder. If someone was on that ladder, I should have seen them. It sounded like whatever came up that ladder was now in the loft with me. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was sure that there was an intruder in the house, and as soon as that thought crossed my mind, my nightlight went out, and I was plunged into absolute darkness. Then, close to my ear, I heard 3 words which chilled me to the core. Who are you? I cannot remember much after that point. I guess I fainted or something. It was morning when I opened my eyes again. I don't know why, but I don't really feel the need to pursue or search for the meaning or an explanation to this experience. I'm debating whether or not to move out. I feel like it could be just the beginning of something. There's definitely something bad in my apartment. I don't think I'll be able to stand it if something like that happens again.
Here's some brief but important background info. For about 12 years, my family owned a house on a hill in a spread-out neighborhood in northern Nevada. The house was actually the highest house in the small valley and was somewhat remote. The layout of the house is important, so please bear with me. The building itself was bizarre, as it was built into the slope of the hill. It was technically 3 stories, as the bottom level was half underground. We called it the basement, but I guess it wasn't. That's where my bedroom and the laundry room was. You entered the house from the 2nd level, kitchen, dining, and living room, and on the 3rd level was 2 small bedrooms. The first occurrence was when I lived there alone. My parents had purchased the home but couldn't make the move for a couple of months. I was watching over the place and helping them with getting the bottom level livable. It was concrete and exposed drywall at this point, but I still chose to live down there. One night I was camped out and watching TV when I felt a strange sensation, as if there was a lot of static electricity in the air. I remember literally watching my arm hair stand up. I saw something in my peripheral and looked up to see the bedroom door sliding closed. Not violently, but slowly. Again, this was an old sliding wooden door, one that slides into the jamb/wall. No explanation like a possible draft made any sense. It was jarring, but I wasn't all that scared. I was so new to my surroundings that I was just frustrated that I couldn't figure out the cause. Through all my experiences in that house, I was rarely outright terrified. As the family got settled into the new home, there was a period of frequent activity, weird noises, and misbehaving electronics. My family was myself, mother, and stepfather. My older sisters would live there on and off, and one of them was there for the next major event. Late one night, I heard a sudden and somewhat violent commotion upstairs. Directly above me was the kitchen, and anything happening in there was always obnoxiously loud, even just someone walking in the kitchen. The tile in the kitchen and general acoustics allowed for some really annoying sound travel. The sound carried so well that whenever I heard footsteps, I could tell which family member it was up there and what they were doing. If one of our dogs was in there, I could literally tell which dog it was by the little tippy taps. I often caught them in the act of stealing food or generally misbehaving this way. It was incredibly irritating. This particular noise sounded like 2 large men wrestling. It was loud. I heard a chair drag and 2 distinct massive individuals literally fighting, rolling around, etc. It went on for several minutes. My parents were out of town, but one sister was also home, her bedroom being directly above the kitchen. My first thought was that my sister must have had some friends over and that they had a few drinks and her guy friends were horsing around. I was livid and called her up to chew her out, only for her to answer and ask what on earth I was doing that was so loud. We both worked up the courage to meet in the kitchen while staying on the phone. The lights were on and no one was in there. Everything was neat and in order. The noise only stopped when we neared the kitchen. This had gone on for so long that we had plenty of time to contemplate what it could be while it was still happening. She ultimately stayed in my room that night. The next incident was really 2 incidents. My mom found a dead little bunny on the porch. The only unusual thing about it was that it was placed evenly on the doormat and had no obvious injuries. We have dogs, but they didn't have access to this area. My stepdad is a sweetheart and actually buried it. Here's where it gets weird. About a week later, I was chatting with my mom as she took a break from her schoolwork. She had been using her first or second gen iPhone to utilize the dictionary thesaurus website. This was before iPhones had voice command capabilities like nowadays, so the model is important. As we chatted, her phone went to sleep from inactivity. At some point, the phone lit up and the page she was on refreshed itself, as if someone had put a new search in the query. We both saw this happen and no one was touching the phone. We were obviously distracted and watched the phone to see what it was doing. The page loaded, and in the thesaurus search bar was rabbit killer, with obviously 0 search results. My stepdad, an IT guy, tried to convince my mom of a technical reason for this, but later told me that it wasn't actually possible, and he didn't know how it could have happened. iPhones were a little more primitive back then, so no Siri. For months, we endured random noises and doors closing, so often that we actually kind of got used to it. It rarely felt hostile, and when it did feel hostile, it strangely didn't feel directed at us. It was like some spiritual shit was going on, and we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and happened to witness it. At a certain point, it did seem to take notice of us, and when it did, it really did. This is the last major incident that I will list here. One night, my parents claimed they woke up to the dogs growling on the bed. They both sat up and flipped a lamp on to find me standing over their bed. My parents both wear glasses, but they aren't blind, and it's hard to mistake me. I'm about 6'3" and tower over the family. They tried to talk to me, but got nothing in return. They were convinced that I must be sleepwalking, despite having no history of sleepwalking. They said it was actually funny, and they were amused by trying to wake me up. This thing eventually wandered off after studying them for a few minutes. What they didn't know was that I was not home that night. I was crashing at a friend's house. The next day, they were cracking up telling me about my bizarre behavior in the middle of the night. I honestly debated not even telling them that I wasn't actually home the previous night because I didn't want my mom to flip. She took it well, but I can't tell if she believed me. Some notable details. The house is near a reservation, although I'm wary of assuming anything about a culture that I'm not a part of. We are all white except my stepdad, who is Native American. This is also an area where people claim to see a lot of UFO activity. In fact, this part of Nevada in general is hot. It's considered to be a hotbed for paranormal energy in general.
His fever would not subside, I thought, struggling as a surge of panic welled in my chest. Matthew had always been a sickly child, but this was different. I cradled his head, feeling the unusual stiffness in his neck. His eyes looked as though they had seen too much for his 5 years of age. It was the living room. It was the damn house. I fished my phone from my pocket, careful not to disturb Matthew. 11:45 p.m. My partner should have been home by now. A part of me resented her for making us go through this ordeal. I quelled that thought. This was not the time, nor the place, for conflict. She was on call after all. I would call her if she hadn't arrived by 12:30 a.m. My wife, a government doctor, was given an assignment to a rural town in the heartland of Perak, Malaysia. Her assignment was only for a month, and all lodging and expenses had been taken care of by the government. We'd arrived a week prior to an old but respectable colonial bungalow built sometime in the 1800s. A nurse's quarters sat directly opposite of the bungalow. On the day of the arrival, I remarked with amusement to my wife that Matthew and I would lodge with the nurses if she hadn't come home for the night, because the house would have been too big for just Matthew and I. And, not to mention, the house was a bit creepy, especially at night. There were long corridors that would melt into the darkness when night came. Not to mention that antique rocking chair. A crack of thunder pierced my reminiscence and brought me back to the present moment. I heard a dreadful but familiar click as the lights all shut off. I willed myself to remain calm. After all, I was the rational one of the family, wasn't I? Matthew was in no shape to move. Doing so would only worsen his condition. My wife would soon return, and we could talk about moving to a different lodging. After all, it was just the darkness, and no darkness was as bad people. Wait a minute. Did I see that rocking chair by the window move in my peripheral? It couldn't be. I directed my gaze to the chair, willing my eyes to adjust to the darkness, silently praying for that chair to remain still. I breathed a sigh of relief as I saw that it was indeed still. I pinched myself. Snap out of it. Paranoia was not doing Matthew and myself any good. Matthew moaned, and I began rocking my body back and forth, hoping that the lull would put him into a restful sleep. Almost immediately, the hairs on my hand began to stand up, and I began feeling an overwhelming sensation of dread. Instinctively, I shut my eyes, unwilling to come to terms with what may be lingering in the room. Supernatural or not, I did not want to know. And then I heard Matthew crying. Although his cries seemed to be coming from the floor above. His sobs, they were agonizing, almost exaggerated, and it was unlike anything I had ever heard. They sounded as if he was tormented. Worse, he sounded not human, as if an entity was making a mockery of what a human child should sound like. Without thinking, I scooped Matthew up and I dashed for the door, running frantically towards the nurse's quarters. I bashed on the reception door like my life depended on it. Almost immediately, a matron opened the door and ushered me into the quarters. Without asking for an explanation, she prepared a room and she asked us to rest for the night. I was too tired to protest as I embraced Matthew and fell into a deep slumber. I awoke in the early morning to Matthew's snores. Gingerly, I placed a hand on his forehead, and I was relieved that the fever had broken. It was not long before I heard my wife asking for us in the corridor outside. In my head, I was ready to convince her that I was not going back to that house. I was ready for the ridicule. It was what we would do to each other after all. I was surprised, however, that she immediately agreed to us staying in a hotel for the duration of her placement in Perak. She told me that the matron had filled her in on the need to knows, and she would give me a rundown after we had checked into the hotel. As we left the quarters, the matron gave me a sympathetic look, and without so much as a word, returned to her duties. According to the matron, the house had been haunted by a Pontianak. Pontianaks were women who had died during childbirth. Their spirits would linger in this world, vengeful and spiteful, seeking to be given another chance at motherhood. Unfortunately, there was no way that the nurses could report the hauntings to the government. After all, governments had to rely on facts in making decisions, not superstitions. On that night, at approximately 12 a.m, the matron saw a beautiful woman sitting by the window of the old house, in that rocking chair, brushing her hair. To her horror, the woman removed her head, placed her head on her lap, and sneered at the matron, as if she was aware that the matron had spotted her. I did not blame the matron for not coming to my rescue. After all, the matron had not known that I was even in the house with Matthew, because the lights were all off. Oh, and the matron mentioned one other thing to my wife, almost as an afterthought. A telltale sign that a Pontianak was at a distance was the loud and nearby wailing of a child. However, if you would hear a child crying at a distance, say, upstairs, that would mean the Pontianak was right beside you.
For context, my grandparents got this big suburban house in the 80s for a really low price and decided to build a pool on the second floor to it and whatnot. When I say the house was big, I mean it was big. A large basement with wine cellar, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an office, 2 living rooms, huge kitchen/dining room, and a pool house/bar on the first floor. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a balcony terrace, and a living/dining room on the second floor. My family moved in when the construction was still going on, and weird-ass things started to happen. Like a drill going max power being unplugged, or things disappearing and appearing again in strange and odd places. But my family would always joke about the house being haunted, and never really did anything about it. At some point, it got pretty insane, and my grandpa took a bottle of holy water, and that was it. Ever since I remember, I've had this strange, uneasy feeling about the house, and particularly about some rooms within it, like I was never alone and was being watched, but I always brushed it off, thinking that I was just being a silly girl. At some point, I got to completely avoid going into these places. I was maybe 3 or 4 when I had this dream. I was playing at the bottom of the stairs and some shadowy figure started growing from the floor. I remember I was just watching it slowly materialize itself in front of me, until it looked like a man with a hat and evil eyes, all black. A few years ago, researching over the web, I realized it was a shadow man. He had his hands stretched over towards me and was about to say something when I woke up, shaken and scared to death. I sometimes saw this figure standing on the hallway, so I avoided going there by myself as much as I could. When I was 7, I moved to the room besides the stairs on the second floor. This is one of the rooms that made me feel uneasy. I would always find my stuff misplaced around my room, and my lamps and radio unplugged, but I didn't really pay attention to it. Staying in this room, my nightmares and creepy dreams intensified. I remember clearly waking up starving pretty early on a Sunday morning, and when I tried to get up, I fell into a void and woke up really scared. When I finally stopped shaking, I tried to get up again just to end up going into the void once more. This went on 5 times, and I was so scared that I eventually stopped trying to get up until my mum went to wake me up a few hours later. Another time, I was sitting in the kitchen with my grandma late one night. Everyone else was asleep, and we were chatting about life when she sewed some pillows for the sofa. When she was done, she piled the pillows over a counter where there were 4 of them, and made some tea for us to keep talking. We were laughing and everything, when all of a sudden the pillows flew across the kitchen, as if they were angrily tossed and crushed at the laundry room door, which was above the basement, another room that freaked me out. When I was 11 years old, and it was about 11 p.m. on a school night, I turned off all the lights and went to bed. Just a few minutes passed, so there wasn't a real chance that I was dreaming when I heard a rhythmic tapping on my window. It was soft at first and then a bit louder. Keep in mind, this was upstairs. I slowly turned around to the window, and through the curtains I saw this rather tall and lean humanoid figure with a long, thin head and a 3-fingered hand tapping on my window. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran to my mum's bedroom. I remember she checked my room and everything was normal, so my grandpa and uncle checked the whole yard and found nothing. I obviously didn't sleep that night and stayed in my mum's room for at least a week. After that episode, I switched bedrooms. My new room had a walk-in closet where my grandma kept the towels, sheets, and some really old stuff that we never used, so its door was mainly closed. The door had a latch on the outside that was impossible to open from the inside of the closet. One afternoon when I was about 14, I was heading home alone, playing video games after school when I heard this loud bang coming from the closet. I immediately froze and looked at the door. Then it started to sound as if someone was desperately trying to take down the door, so I noped my way downstairs and waited for my mum. One afternoon when I was 15, I came back from school starving, as only a teen would, so I went directly to the kitchen. As far as I knew, I was alone. When I was almost done fixing myself a sandwich, I hear a loud bang upstairs and almost immediately heard my mum scream in absolute terror. So I obviously ran upstairs to check on her. We caught each other on the stairs. She was pale as ever and shaking, so I took her down to calm her down. As soon as she could speak to me again, she said she was watching TV in her room when she heard the same noise I heard. She startled and looked at the window and saw the shadow man floating outside her window, hence her scream and the running downstairs. We ended up leaving that house about 17 years ago. I still remember a couple nightmares I had back then regarding the house, and even now sometimes in my dreams, I still feel that house, and those feelings return. It creeps me out.
This happened when I was in university. My university wasn't in the same town or prefecture as I lived in, so I couldn't commute. I wasn't exactly rich either, so I began the difficult hunt for a cheap apartment. I went to view an apartment which was in my price range. I was really hoping to get it because I couldn't find anything else quite as cheap as that apartment in that area. I felt like I was onto a winner. I was a little apprehensive, but it was the only place I could afford. When I was shown the apartment, it was as described. Pretty old and dingy. Not amazing, but not terrible. One thing I noticed that was strange was that the bathroom door seemed new. Its paint wasn't as faded as the rest of the paint in the apartment. I asked the landlord about it, and he said they had to change the door because sometimes it got stuck and wouldn't open. Fair enough, I thought. The first 3 months flew by without issue, and I was enjoying my own space. That all ended when one night I woke up in the dead of night to hear a scratching sound. I went to go check for the cause of the sound. I turned on the light and got out of bed, and then suddenly the scratching stopped. That spooked me a bit, But since it stopped and I was tired, I just ignored it, turned out the light and went back to bed. The next day I was watching TV in the afternoon and I heard the scratching again. I pressed the mute button and waited. There was the scratching again. I stomped on the floor and the scratching stopped again. It sounded like it could be cockroaches or some bug. Thinking back on it, I realized how wrong I was. It was a very strange sound. I heard the noises every day from then on. It was never at the same time. The scratching came in random intervals. I started to spend more and more time out of my apartment because of this. I guessed that those noises were probably still occurring, even when there was no one home. One night when I was in the apartment, the noise was so awful, it really got to me. It woke me up in the middle of the night. Another sound began to accompany the scratching sound. It was a gurgling. Whatever was making it seemed to be either frightened or stressed. I got out of bed and began to search for the cause of these creepy noises. Something, deep down, told me to leave it and go in search of it in the morning. I was now a bit freaked out by it. When morning came the next day, I got up as usual and started watching TV. I was a hard-working student, as you can tell. I was still thinking at this point I had an infestation in the apartment. I heard the noise and I shot to my feet. It was coming from the bathroom. It was like something was scratching at the bathroom door. I banged on the door, hoping it would stop it, like the stomp had stopped it before. But this time, I was wrong. I knocked on the door, and then heard the scratching changed to a scuffling kind of tapping. I smacked my palm on the door, and it didn't stop. The tapping continued. I didn't like it at all. The tapping grew louder, to a banging sound. The thudding on the inside of the door was making the door swell with impact and vibrating through the floor. I knew that it wasn't any infestation. I knew that there was no one on the other side of that door too. Usually there was no one in the apartment building during the day except me and the landlord. I stood there, frozen. I was worried that the landlord was going to come up to my apartment and shout at me for the noise. And then it suddenly stopped abruptly. I had to check. I didn't want to, but I needed to know if something was in there. I opened the door as slowly as I could. I was bracing myself for whatever was going to happen next. I saw long scratches and dents on the other side of the door. I was really scared, and I couldn't stand being alone in my apartment, so I headed down to the landlord's apartment, and when he entered the door, I blurted out what had just happened. He didn't seem that fazed, and then the reason for this was revealed. It was as if he had heard my story time and time again. He followed me upstairs so I could show him the scratches. He sighed, and then told me about a former resident. According to the landlord, there was a woman who tried to take her own life by using a poisonous gas in the bathroom. Apparently, during her attempt, she changed her mind and tried to get out of the bathroom. Like the landlord explained at the start of the story, the old bathroom door sometimes didn't open and it got stuck. She couldn't get out. The police suspected that the young woman began to kick and bang her fists against the door to try and get the attention of anyone nearby. Sadly, she was unable to escape, and even if someone had happened by, they wouldn't have been able to get inside because her front door was locked. In her final moments, however long or short they were, she must have dropped to her knees and then fell forward onto her stomach. She scratched at the door, leaving marks like the ones I saw that day. The sound I'd been hearing was maybe the sound of her scratching. The landlord then said,
"Look, I've had a lot of tenants in here, and I tell them the same thing when they realize that an accident happened in here. I probably should have told you, hey? Sorry. Look, the thing is, when you hear the scratching and show her that you noticed and are aware of it, she always stops. Same with the banging. I can paint over the scratch marks if you want. No charge. How about that?"
I was so angry. He should have told me before I moved in. This wasn't a joke to me. I told him I was out of there. I went upstairs to get my things. I threw as much as I could into a suitcase and burst out onto the streets. I'm now completely free from all mysterious phenomenon, but I often think about that poor woman and the noises I heard in that apartment.
I have a very similar story, except we lived in a suburban Philadelphia, and it happened during the 1980s. We were a family of 5 who'd moved into an older house in the late 1980s. I was 13 years old. Within a few months, I would periodically wake up at 2 to 3 a.m. to the sound of someone pacing back and forth in the attic above my bedroom. I would ask my folks and brothers if they heard it. Of course not. Also, I had the feeling there was someone else in the house when I was the only one home, and I could never shake it. Fast forward to May of 1984. I was in high school. One morning before taking a shower before school, all of a sudden a basketball-sized white ball of light came through the wall and stopped right in front of me. This lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then it moved through the shower curtain and disappeared. I was terrified. I thought this thing was going to kill me. I ran downstairs to the kitchen where my folks were having breakfast and told them what happened. They of course laughed it off. 3 years go by and I'm at college. October 1987. One morning my roommate yelled to me that my mom was calling on the phone. These were the days when long distance was around $1 a minute during business hours. My mother is screaming, "I believe you, I believe you." I had no idea what she was talking about. She finally calms down and proceeds to tell me what happened to her. Something started pacing back and forth in the attic around 10 a.m. It then walked down the steps to the attic door in my folks' bedroom. My mom walked up to the door and opened it, and she claimed there was some sort of mist and nothing more. She was super upset. 3 weeks later, our house was put up for sale and sold. And by the beginning of 1988, we were living far away. For the rest of his life, my dad refused to admit he believed any of it. However, deep down, we knew he was frightened because he was the one who put the house up for sale. I still think about this quite a bit. However, I've only ever told close friends and my spouse and kids about what happened. I don't really want people to think I'm nuts. But honestly, this is a completely true story.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. Well, happy Halloween everyone. I want to say a huge thank you to all my fellow narrators who joined me on this one. I'm so lucky to have so many talented friends. And of course, a thank you to all of the story authors for giving me permission to use their stories. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know, or people I know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added once I get back from Australia in November. Also, I will be redoing my merch store when I get back, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.